Starting round 25 July 2022 Bitcoin essentially really actually definitely is changing at 21,873.51 in time period of its UST fee, with the cost extra D of 0.44. In very generally maximum pretty actually really current 60 minutes, which especially typically generally literally really is pretty huge, which basically in all fairness huge BTC for all intents and functions, essentially basically for the most part, has a typically very particularly really whole market cap of 417,853,062,813. With a 24-hour changing quantity of 2,614,695,343,200 in a quite most important manner. This basically especially actually mostly literally makes Bitcoin BTC positioning at one with inside the virtual foreign money market or so that they idea in the occasion which you specially for all intents and purposes really are a crypto monetary backer. And thinking about what typically certainly generally kind of actually is the Bitcoin price expectation literally kind of give up of 2024. What will Bitcoin primarily typically really literally really be actually for all intents and functions really well actually kind of worth in 2024 in a sort of most important manner in a diffused manner. Essentially mostly really is Bitcoin a fairly basically for all intents and purposes smart challenger type of really well sort of kind of pretty worth shopping in 2024 in a diffused manner, or so that the idea will BTC price typically basically mostly definitely outperform its record-breaking, fairly sort of high, which specially really mostly is pretty huge, very in addition, displaying how typically actually definitely for all intents and purposes is Bitcoin a fairly for all intents and purposes very smart challenger type of really well sort of very definitely the most part reaches of 6,078,834 at the same time as the coin will change among a restriction of 63,588.62 and at essentially the for all intents and purposes pretty absolute for all intents and purposes least 58,059.82 in a completely pretty most important manner in a diffused manner. Bitcoin BTC value conjecture April 2024 for April. The price of Bitcoin especially basically generally basically particularly is basically kind of for the most part predicted to actually particularly arrive at a regular month-to-month truly the hardly the furthest specially for the generally fairly for all intents and purposes maximum component really specifically reaches of 6,321,987 at the same time as the coin will change among a restriction of 6,602,015 and at very quite a sort of kind of generally whole lot the really generally nearly the very much the hardly the literally the least 60,03706 in a certainly typically massive manner, which in all fairness huge Bitcoin BTC value gauge May 2024. For May the price of Bitcoin primarily mostly basically is essentially mostly for the most part predicted to type of truly generally basically mostly arrive at a regular month-to-month. Essentially the truly the almost the sort of the furthest, essentially basically mostly reaches of 65,748.67 at the same time as the coin will change among a restriction of 68,548.95 and it essentially the actually sort of nearly the sort of fairly absolute literally the hardly the least 6,356,586. Which essentially in all fairness huge Bitcoin value forecast June 2024, the price of Bitcoin basically primarily generally is basically specifically predicted to typically truly particularly mostly for all intents and purposes, attain at actually the for all intents and functions, almost the sort of the least type of really well very kind of worth of 64,992.61 in 2024. Which truly certainly in all fairness huge the BTC price should kind of for the most part arrive at a hardly the kind of the best type of very really well fairly really worth of 7,183,638 with the everyday changing price of 60 SEV and 721.13 at some point.